Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th Canto, Chapter 27, Text 5. Tayaivaḿ ramamāṇasya kāma-kaśmala-cetasaḥ. New life. This body. Everybody has a new life, new chapter, millions of births. So every time we get a body, it's a new body. Okay, purport.
Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Śrīla Govinda Das Ṭhākura has sung, ei-dhana, yauvana, putra, parijana, ithe, āche, paratīti, kamala-dala-jala, jīvana, ṭalamala, bhaja, paratīti. In this verse, Śrīla Govinda Das actually says that there is no bliss in the enjoyment of youthful life. In youth, a person becomes very lusty to enjoy all kinds of sense objects. The sense objects are form, taste, smell, touch, and sound. The modern scientific method, or advancement of scientific civilization, encourages the enjoyment of these five senses. The younger generation is very pleased to see a beautiful form, to hear radio messages of material news and sense gratificatory songs, to smell nice scents, nice flowers, and to touch the soft body or breast of a young woman and gradually touch the sex organs. All of this is also very pleasing to the animals. Therefore, in human society, there are restrictions in the enjoyment of the five sense objects. If one does not follow, he becomes exactly like an animal. Thus, in this verse, it is specifically stated, kāma-kaśmala-cetasaḥ. The consciousness of King Purañjana was polluted by lusty desires and sinful activities. In the previous verse, it is stated that Purañjana, although advanced in consciousness, lay down on a very soft bed with his wife. This indicates that he indulged too much in sex. The words navaḿ, vayaḥ are also significant in this verse. They indicate the period of youth from age 16 to 30. These 13 or 15 years of life are years in which one can very strongly enjoy the senses. When one comes to this age, he thinks that life will go on and that he will simply continue enjoying his senses, but time and tide wait for no man. The span of youth expires very quickly. One who wastes his life simply by committing sinful activities in youth immediately becomes disappointed and disillusioned when the brief period of youth is over. The material enjoyments of youth are especially pleasing to a person who has no spiritual training. If one is trained only according to the bodily conception of life, he simply leads a disappointed life because bodily sense enjoyment finishes within 40 years or so. After 40 years, one simply leads a disillusioned life because he has no spiritual knowledge. For such a person, the expiration of youth occurs in half a moment. Thus, King Purañjana's pleasure, which he took in lying down with his wife, expired very quickly.
Midlife crisis. Once they reach midlife, because they have no spiritual assets, and the pitch or the intensity of sense gratification is reduced. They're not as attractive as they were. They're not able to endure as much. Body slows down, so many things. Then they become very disappointed and very depressed, bewildered, disillusioned, because they have nothing to, they don't know who they are. They never spend any time trying to figure out what the purpose of life was. So then they try to figure out what the purpose of life is. What am I doing? They find themselves overwhelmed. And so then they take to more intoxication to try to drown their sorrows or find some. Yesterday I saw a sign that said that marijuana cures Alzheimer's. What else? Cancer, Parkinson's disease. What else did it say? Some big claims. If that were true, then that would be a wonderful thing. But it's not true. It's a false claim. What they mean is, when you take enough intoxication, you can try to forget these things, forget that you have cancer, forget that you have all these diseases. So that doesn't solve the problem, that's just sweeping it under the rug. The problem is still there. If a snake is living in your front room, and you say, just put up a curtain, won't bother you. Go on and join, but then the snake crawls under the curtain and bites you when you're not expecting. Snake of death. So don't put faith in any of these solutions, intoxication solution, or medical solution, or whatever. It's the only solution is to stop taking material bodies. You have to make this body the last body that we take, the last birth. So the problem is not death, the problem is birth. You have to stop so there's no more births. And how to stop that? No more fruitive activities. Activities should only be engaged in for pleasing Krishna. Then they have no reactions. Karma, vikarma, akarma. Karma means pious activities. Vikarma means sinful activities. And akarma means activities that bring no karmic reactions. And that's devotional service. One has to. Otherwise, he'll have to face this horrible situation again and again. One birth after the next. And the animals, don't think the animals have no suffering. They're also suffering. Continue.
Kāma-kaśmala-cetasaḥ also indicates that unrestricted sense enjoyment is not allowed in the human form of life by the laws of nature. If one enjoys his senses unrestrictedly, he leads a sinful life. The animals do not violate the laws of nature. For example, the sex impulse in animals is very...
I think we skipped a paragraph there.
Skip it?
Oh wait, let's see. Oh, excuse me, go ahead.
Okay. The animals do not violate the laws of nature. For example, sex impulse in animals is very strong during certain months of the year. The lion is very powerful. He is a flesh eater and is very strong, but he enjoys sex only once in a year. Similarly, according to religious injunctions, a man is restricted to enjoy sex only once in a month after the menstrual period of the wife, and if the wife is pregnant, he is not allowed sex life at all. That is the law for human beings.
This is why it's so important to get this training from the beginning, because otherwise, if one doesn't get spiritual training from the beginning, then it's difficult to to understand and to give up sense gratification. The Westerners have a disadvantage because they're habituated to enjoy the senses, whereas those coming from Vedic culture, India, they have some advantage. I have experience of this when I was setting up bhakti programs in South Africa. The preaching was to the Indian community. And the Indian community had come over from India over 100 years before. But because of apartheid, they were not allowed to associate with the black Africans or the white Africans. They could only associate with their own group, the Indians. So the result was they kept their culture to a large degree. In fact, there were no divorces on record amongst the Indian community. And the proof of that was the first 16 young men that joined the bhakti program from age 17 to 28, none of them had had sex their whole life. Well, that's a big advantage because they're taught like that. Even the Vedic culture is not, the Hindu culture is not perfectly in order, that's a fact. But still the remnants of it are so valuable. There's a saying that elephant, dead or alive, 1 lakh of rupees. It means if he's alive, he's worth 1 lakh of rupees because he can work so hard, he's very big and strong. And if he's dead, he's worth 1 lakh of rupees because his ivory, his tusks are very valuable. Well, the idea is that even Vedic culture, although it's not alive fully, still has value because of the culture, the tradition. Tradition is also a valuable thing if it's a good tradition. Bad tradition is not good. But the Vedic culture is coming from very good history. There's Krishna, before Krishna, Lord Ramachandra. This God-centered Bhagavat culture is so valuable. Continue.
A man is allowed to keep more than one wife because he cannot enjoy sex when the wife is pregnant. If he wants to enjoy sex at such a time, he may go to another wife who is not pregnant. These are the laws mentioned in the Manu Samhita and other scriptures. These laws and scriptures are meant for human beings. As such, if one violates these laws, he becomes sinful. The conclusion is that unrestricted sense enjoyment means sinful activities. Illicit sex is sex that violates the laws given in the scriptures. When one violates the laws of the scriptures, or the Vedas, he commits sinful activities. One who is engaged in sinful activities cannot change his consciousness. Our real function is to change our consciousness from kāma-kaśmala, sinful consciousness, to Krishna, the Supreme Pure. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, param brahma param dhamma pavitram paramam. Krishna is the Supreme Pure, and if we change our consciousness from material enjoyment to Krishna, we become purified. This is the process recommended by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as the process of Chaito Darpana Marjana, cleansing the mirror of the heart.
So there's hope for even late starters, those who did not begin the process from a young age. It's recommended Kumara Acharya Pragya Dharmam Bhagavatanya. Gurukula is a system which is very important to train especially the young boys are sent to the Gurukula at the age of 5, and they get trained how to not be interested in sense gratification. They're not given soft beds. They're not allowed to mix with the opposite sex. And they're taught, that's on one side the restriction. And on the other side, they're taught what the purpose of life is and who they are. That they're not this body, that the purpose of life is self-realization. And the way to do that is to follow the instructions of Krishna and his representative, the spiritual master. Then their life will be successful. Then they won't have to continue birth after birth in this material world. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, as described in the Shastras, and he's come to give the process for the age of Kali, because in the age of Kali, the sinful activities have reached the maximum. Of course, we may think it's maximum now, but it's getting worse. As Kali Yuga, it's only been 5,000 years since Kali Yuga began, and things get continually worse for the next 427,000 years, until finally Lord Kalki comes at the very end of Kali Yuga and liberates everyone who's left in his own sword-like way. But he's not the Yuga avatar, because he comes at the end of the Yuga. The Yuga avatar gives the process of self-realization for the age. And for that we have Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as the Yuga avatar. He appeared at the beginning, Sandhya, near the beginning of Kali Yuga. And he gave the process, Ceto Darpanamarjanam, cleansing the heart by chanting, especially the Maha Mantra he recommended, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. By chanting, the heart becomes cleansed, and when the desire for sinful activities goes away, it becomes purified. Otherwise, by prayaschitta or atonement, one can counteract the effect of a sinful activity. But the problem is that after atoning, the tendency to commit sinful activities remains. Just like if I used to have a friend, and before I joined, and he was Catholic, so every Friday night, before the weekend activities began, we would go stop in to his church, and he would confess for the past week's activities, sinful activities. And he would get some atonement, some pardon, and something he was supposed to do, chant some money. But then we would begin, or he would begin his next week right afterwards. In other words, his heart didn't change because there was no transcendental knowledge. It was just some atonement. And even Parikshit Maharaj didn't like the idea of atonement. He was saying, what is the use of atoning? It is like the bathing of an elephant. He bathes very nicely, and then afterwards he throws dirt all over his body. What is the use? But devotional service, it uproots the whole plant or the whole tree of sinful desires. It doesn't just cut them off at the surface, like you can cut so many grass, you can cut it off at the surface, but it grows again. Or weeds, you cut them off at the surface. But as long as the root remains, they'll return. So that root is the sinful desire, the kāma. The word is used here, kāma. Kāma is the perversion of prema. Love is a natural thing. We have many songs about love, many books about love. But their idea of love is actually kāma because it's based on the body, material body. The real love is prema because it's not material. It's spiritual. It's spiritual because it's only from the spirit. It doesn't depend on the body. But as long as one's so-called love is for males or females of this material world, then that means it's on the bodily platform. And then it's kāma. So, all these songs and things about love, it's not love. There's no love in the material world. It may give the impression of love, but as soon as something changes, I know one person, he was in love, and his wife was in love with him, and then he became paralyzed from the neck down. The love changed. She found someone else. So that means it's not love, because real love is ahoy tukya pratiyata. Or as Lord Chaitanya says, that whether he makes me broken-hearted by not being present before me, or handles me roughly by his embrace, still he's my worshipful Lord unconditionally. So without conditions, and not for one's own gratification, but for the gratification of the beloved. Well, sometimes we have to do things in the course of our devotional service that may not be appealing to us. We can't only serve when it's appealing to us, because appealing to us means appealing to our senses. But appealing, we have to use our intelligence to know that this is good for me. This is good for me because this is what Krishna wants me to do. Even if I don't feel like doing it, I do the best I can. I try. And Krishna will be pleased. Krishna makes up. Ananyas chintayanto mam ei-dhana paryupasate tesham nityavyuktanam yogakshema bhahamyam. For one who's always engaged in devotional service, meditating on the transcendental form of the Lord, to them Krishna says, I carry what they lack and preserve what they have. give special help, whatever they lack. And this is a very important verse because we lack so much. Bhakti nai veda nai. We don't have bhakti, we don't have veda, we don't have knowledge. We don't have purity, we don't have good birth. Śrīla Goswami and Sanatana Goswami, they presented themselves as having no assets. That's how they approach their spiritual master. If one thinks that he's got some assets, then he's bewildered. Janma. Before Queen Kunti, she describes Janmaishvarya, Shruti Shribir, Edamana Madak Puman, Naivarhat, Jabidhatam Bhai, Tomakinchana Gochana. Krishna is especially favorable to those who are not trying to increase their good birth, or are proud of their wealth, or their beauty, or their education. These things are not valuable in devotional service, unless, let me put it like this, these things are not required for devotional service. If one has them, then they can be employed, but it's not a requirement. If one is born in a low family, for example, Muslims, Mohammedans, by birth, they're engaged in eating meat, and not only them, practically everyone in the world now. Everyone is addicted to sinful activities. So who's got a good birth? Generally we don't. But it doesn't matter, because devotional service to Krishna is so powerful that all these things, even if one is not educated, the idea is that even if one somehow or other takes to devotional service, he's saved from all the bad effects of the Kali Yuga and overcomes his deficiencies. Doesn't have to be wealthy, he can be poor, he can be uneducated, he can be from a low birth. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Ṭhākura he set up a village for leper devotees who had leprosy. So that socially it wasn't accepted for them to mix with the rest of the society. But it didn't matter because they could perform devotional service, and they did. So that means that this will be their last life if one performs devotional service. Then he won't have to take birth again in this material world. This is the end. Going back to home, back to Godhead. And that's where our real position is. This is the prison. We keep thinking that this is the real life in the spiritual world. We're thinking is some kind of a dull place. But actually that's where the real activity, the real action is going on. And we're now in the prison, we're restricted. So, it's better to control the senses, engage them in devotional service instead of sense gratification. And the important thing is to stay in the association of devotees. Because as soon as we associate with materialistic persons, as was described yesterday in the verse, that association tamodvaram yoshitam sangi sangam, leads to the hellish worlds. Whereas if we associate with the Mahatmas, Mahatsevam dvaram mahur vimukte, then going back to Godhead is very easy. This movement is for Mahatmas. Someone may not be a Mahatma from the beginning, but by associating with Mahatmas, he becomes. He wants to do like they do. Just like a child. If a child is given good training, how to bow down before the Lord, how to take prasadam, how to have kirtan, then it becomes natural. So good association is so important. Try to live with the devotees. They say, well, I don't have to live with... Yes, you don't have to. But if you want to finish up your life in this world, in this one lifetime, then you need all the help you can get. So, associating with the devotees. Living in a holy place, for example, living in Vrindavan, devotional service is 100 times intensified. And these temples, Prabhupada said, are Vrindavan, or the spiritual world. So, to live in a temple is transcendental. Then, if we go on serving Krishna, and when we give up this body, Tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mamriti sarjana, one doesn't have to take birth again. Thank you very much. Any questions?
In terms of sense control, how does Maya make a devotee succumb to sense enjoyment?
Well, pungsastriya mituni bhavametam tayo hridaya grantamahu togriya kshetra sutapta vitaya janasya moho yamahamameti. Begins with the male-female principle. As long as one thinks he's a male, as long as one identifies with the body, then he'll identify with the opposite sex also for enjoyment. Because it's the arrangement. Maya is the illusory energy of the Lord. She's been empowered to create attraction and illusory pleasure, so that the living entity who wants to be the enjoyer, who wants to be the Lord, who wants to be God, he can make believe he's doing that. So the man thinks he's the enjoyer, the woman thinks she's the enjoyer. Even though we say pungsa or purusha, purusha means the enjoyer, and it refers to a male, but everyone in the material world is thinking that they're the enjoyer. The woman also wants to lord it over the man, and the man wants to lord it over the woman. So this is how Maya works. Therefore, brahmacharya is recommended. At least brahmacharya life for the first so many years. With that training, then if one enters grihastha ashram, he won't become captivated. Evidently, our King Purañjana didn't have sufficient brahmacharya training. He became captivated, fell down. Then it becomes the grihamandakupam, the deep dark well of household life. But if one is trained in brahmacharya, then he lives in the grihastha ashram without becoming degraded, and he'll be able to retire pancha urdhvam vanam vrajet at the age of 50. He'll he will be looking forward to retirement from working and sex and family affairs. And he turns his attention towards the spiritual side even more, because he had the training when he was young. So brahmachari. Ashram is very important. We shouldn't do away with the brahmachari ashram. It shouldn't be neglected. It's very important, because the brahmacharis will become the grihastas. And then if they're trained nicely in brahmacharya, then as grihastas they will be exemplary, and then as vanaprasthas and sannyasis, and as fathers and mothers, everything will be auspicious. Other questions?
In terms of purifying our material desires, lately we've just been trying to follow courtesy by fasting and not drinking. Does that help with doing that?
Yeah. But the main process is chanting 16 rounds, following the 4 principles. I was on a walk with Prabhupada once in Chicago, and the devotees asked Prabhupada, or they announced to Prabhupada that they were, on Ekadashis, they were chanting 25 rounds. And Prabhupada said, very nice. You can chant 25 rounds, or up to 64 rounds, or even 16 rounds. So devotees brought it up again. Well, but shouldn't everyone chant 25 rounds on Ekadashi? Prabhupada said, yes, you can chant 25 rounds, or even 16 rounds. And he said this preaching, the Sankirtan activity is so purifying, that, and it's so important that actually you don't need to even worry about the rounds. And everyone laughed. They said, but you shouldn't do that. He said, but that's how powerful it is. So we have the 2 processes, Panchatriki Vidhi and Bhagavad Vidhi, and they combine together. So we do have deity worship, we do have regulative principles, but we also have the preaching work, the scriptures, the chanting, the Sankirtan. So if one just follows all these things, at least on Ekadashi one shouldn't eat grains and beans, at least that. If one wants to observe it more strictly, that's also acceptable. But the process of devotional service as it's been given, the program of temple worship and all that, keeping clean, there's nothing more potent than that. The program that Prabhupada's given us, it works. The problem is sometimes we don't follow it. And if we don't follow it, then we get into trouble. But the Sankirtan, combined with good temple program, it's so powerful that it can make someone from a Malecha into a Vaishnava. Okay. Any other points? Thank you very much. Śrīmad Bhāgavatam ki jai.